Hello and welcome to Minor Compositions. Today we're joined here, and I did this thing again where I should have asked you before I press record how to pronounce your name correctly so I don't butcher it. We're joined by I'm gonna try. Hope I don't miss it too badly. Alex Taek-Gwang Lee.
Perfect. Yeah.
Oh, good. I didn't mess it up. Okay. Yeah, we're joined by Alex here to talk about his brand newish book, Communism After Deleuze, which just came out this spring?
Yeah, sure. The February.
February.
Mm.
Um, and it feels like a really nice book to have here as part of this little discussion series because well I'm not sure Alex, I'm not sure how familiar you are with autonomy media or with binary compositions but the title of the imprint minor compositions comes from it was stolen from a book by Nick Toburn, um
All right. Mhm.
Deleuze, Marx and Politics, which you also cite. So
Yeah.
um it, so there's a sort of shared interest in sort of reapproaching sort of Deleuze through Deleuze's relationship to Marx, which is, I think,
Mm.
becoming a bit less strange than it might have been 15 or 20 years ago. But yeah, so thanks for coming along and thanks for writing the book. It's a really interesting book. Um, Maybe one of the ways to start getting into it is one of the themes that goes across the book for you is the idea of a minor communism,
Mm.
or the idea of many forms of communism without centralized parties. So maybe if we start, can you just maybe unpack a little bit about what you mean by that, and what you mean by the idea of a communism which is minor in Deleuze and Guattari's sense?
Yeah, thank you for having me. And then, first of all, actually, my idea of minor communism, um, the perfectly actually resonated with the minor composition. All right. This is a really correlative, the ideas. Um, In short, I would say, the minor communism means many communisms. It means actually we would have many communisms because Karl Marx, and then with the Friedrich Engels already discussed it, his Communist Manifesto. He already mentioned, many communism. One of them is primitive communism. But if actually you removed, that evolutionary framework by which so-called orthodox Marxism understood the development history, you can find out the many communism is possible. That means if you actually reject the revolutionary the framework from that kind of orthodox Marxism or some so-called historical materialism, right? So in such a kind of some evolutionary sense, you would see many communism in human history. Even the Karl Marx, acknowledged in his later life, right? He actually said, many, the route to the communism is possible. The famous letter to the Bela Jasulich, all right? That is actually exactly today's Saito Kohei developed his own green Marxism based on that late Marxist perspective. So I think actually from this perspective, Deleuze-Guattari really quite earlier, raised this the idea of many communism, and then also they tried to actually understood, they tried to understand, the capitalism, in particular global capitalism, from the perspective of this minor communism. Another thing is I want to emphasize here is that uh, Marxism, actually began, or some Karl Marx himself is a European, right? He was baptized by, some European Enlightenment, but he also had, that kind of experience of colonial expansion. That's why he actually described, the kind of colonialism and then imperialism and its relation to global capitalism in his Capital. But actually, he didn't actually develop that one. So since then, actually, many Marxists try to explain, the colonialism, imperialism, but it was not quite successful. But because actually they lack this concept of, minor communism. That means many communism before the capitalism already, the worked, across the world. And then actually capitalism means, at some point, captured this kind of communist desire, or some communism as such. They try to actually, single out this many communism into their own mode of production. Actually, this is actually the reason why I raised this concept, minor communism. And then the concept of minority is resonated with not many people. Even, Deleuzian scholar, pointed out this fact, what I'm actually, the Lenin's concept of Bolshevism. Bolshevism means, the really actually, the fit on what Deleuze and Guattari try to explain, the meaning of minorities. Minority means, the number is small, but actually the value is universal, is a general, the many. That is what they try to say. So in Deleuzian Guattarian sense, minority or some minor something does not mean a marginal one. It's a kind of a many, against a major norm. If actually you dismantle the norm, you would have a many, It's quite, the beyond the quantitative, the evaluation. That's the meaning of many communism. And another one is a lot of people actually nowadays said communism failed. The communism does not exist. No, I don't think actually that. I don't think actually that such a. And then also I try to raise some kind of counter evidence, not only theoretical but some kind of empirical sense actually the kind of some argument. Communism ended or communism failed, or some communism impossible. Of course, communism impossible. That's why we have communism. Yeah, that's the meaning of a minor communism.
I like there how you gesture a bit towards late Marx. I'm thinking him. I guess you mean like the sort of the ethnological notebooks, right?
Yeah, sure. Actually.
And it's interesting that the way you're talking about sort of getting rid of this idea of there being this linear progress, this sort of linear evolutionary progress. In a way, this also kind of argument if you've I don't know if you read uh The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrove. And a lot of the arguments they're making, along with people like James Scott, is that history doesn't have this one way evolution. You have different patterns of historical development. You get rises of states, then their collapse, then the movement over in other directions. And so you have a whole variety of different kinds of forms of commonality which develop historically in different directions. And thus, yeah, you could come up with, as you say, with a kind of variety of communisms, which don't have to conform to a sort of one-track historical development model, which is very interesting.
Yeah, actually, not only actually Deleuze Guattari already, many the philosopher, in particular, actually the Marxist philosopher like Walter Benjamin, raised this question on that evolutionary, the concept of history. That is exactly what the Benjamin wrote. The title, wrote the article titled, on concept of history, and he actually criticized, very, the orthodox understanding of history, the historical materialism, and then it doesn't mean he rejected historical materialism as such, but he tried to, he tried to propose kind of some non-linear sense of history, and then more like, very similar to the Deleuze and Guattari's concept of the non-linear history is a non-evolutionary, involution, their own term, involutionary adaptation. That is what they said, and they borrowed this idea from Bergson. But not many people also mentioned this one. But Bergsonian Marxism was in those days when they wrote, the Thousand Plateau, popular in Africa. That is African people, that took this Bergson, very strangely, but they try to emphasize, this kind of Bergsonian idea of a time. Bergson tried to separate the time from, space. And then if actually you emphasize, that kind of time as a duration or as a memory, nowadays the quantum physics, the engage this kind of a linear sense of time too, And then Bergson actually developed this idea, and then this Bergsonian idea really influenced the Deleuze-Guattarists, the later work like Thousand Plato, and then, in my opinion, this kind of idea actually, shed a light on, the Marx, the later Marx, understanding of history. So that's what I'm thinking actually, Deleuze-Guattari contributed to the rethinking, the Marxism.
Well, there's a certain sense in which almost sticking to a set historical narrative of development actually is part of what led to some of the, I'll say, the worst parts in the history of Marxism. I mean, I'll give you one example. Blanking on his name, 1920s Russian economist who argues that basically you have to primitively accumulate the peasants before you can get to communism.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
I forget his name. It keeps with the idea of socialist primitive accumulation. Basically, in other words, you have to go through capitalism to get to communism. And then you have a lot of sort of party formation, which basically says you have to evolve this way. And once you get rid of that sort of set, we have to do primitive accumulation first, which strictly is kind of silly. Yeah. But to come up with what you're saying about Bergsonian Marxism in Africa, which I have to admit that I know very little about. Could you maybe talk a bit more about that and how that came to be a thing?
Yeah, actually, Bergsonian Marxism is, actually Bergson was, regarded as some kind of imperialist philosopher, because lots of French Marxists criticized him. But one of actually, the Deleuzian achievement in history of philosophy is to revive Bergson. But I mean, actually, he also, contributed actually to revive many philosophers like Nietzsche. That he actually also revived the Nietzsche against the kind of fascist the reading. But very similar way, actually, Deleuze also saved in Bergson, from the kind of critique, also some Marxist critique of him and then his philosophy. For instance, the Georgi Pollicher, and then, he actually, criticized Bergson. Nizan also, Nizan also actually criticized, Bergson. But against this, actually, the critique, Deleuze actually saved, the Bergsonian philosophy to interpret or some kind of producing some counter discourse to Orthodox Marxism, because in those days, France has, the strong Communist Party. Actually, you all know that 1968, May is definitely revealed, what they mean, in such a, French context. So, many explanations needed. But anyway, just the problem of this, the French Communist Party in those days, in the middle of the kind of Algerian war, they actually were stuck to the, actually the Stalin's, order. That means actually the central committee. They simply actually practice, the central committee's order. Of course, actually, who's central committee is Stalin, all right? But it caused a huge, problem. That is exactly actually the beginning of new revolution. What I mean, actually, that they didn't properly engage in this Algerian war. But through this kind of, some the African liberation movement, the Bergson's vitalism was adopted, for the defending the African, the spirit against the so-called European science-oriented Marxism. In particular, actually, they criticize Althusserianism. Of course, actually, it was not actually really developed, but anyway, just that they try to the emphasize, the kind of singularity of the African, the situation. And then that is exactly what I mean. Actually, the Senegal actually, the communist actually adopted this Bergson to reinterpret, the Marx, the against the kind of Eurocentric understanding. So this is actually the reason why. Of course, actually, the Deleuze didn't directly quote the African, the Bergson Marxism, But I think, in those days, Bergson, they used for the kind of African revolution, and then he would know, this, the fact. That's why actually he would, the easily, revive, Bergson to, the renovate, the Marxism in those days. So in this sense, actually, Bergson was, reintroduced, actually by the kind of the African revolutionary to their own the African context, African situation, because actually this French the Communist Party was actually stuck to the kind of dilemma. They must support the African liberation, but at the same time the French the Communist Party was part of the French regime. That dilemma, this French Communist Party didn't solve this problem, and then through this one, actually, Bergson Marxism really actually emerged.
One thing which might be a direct connection, I don't know if I haven't looked into it, but so Fanon, before he goes to Algeria, he does sort of a training or internship basically at St. Albans, the sort of psychiatric facility in France, which is then being run by Tusquets, and then later has some involvement of Jean Uri, who then also worked with Guattari. So I don't know if there's any direct connection between those two, but they're all in the same building somewhere at some point in the mid 50s.
So actually, yeah, some people said Guattari ruined Deleuze. But in my opinion, is the truth is opposite. But actually, Deleuze ruined Guattari, because in those days, actually, Guattari was Lacanian psychiatrist. That means Lacanian analyst. But he actually found out the problem of Lacan. Not only just the Lacan, but psychoanalysis as such. He had some skepticism of psychoanalysis, because in those days, what happened in Algeria, they actually observed the kind of a paradox. In particular, the Communist party, because Guattari was the member of the kind of the leftist oppositional. That means actually the small actually the group within the Communist Party, youth group, the young people, young communists, they gathered their own the group, and then but Guattari is Trotskyist. That means he is also quite strong Lenin. That means is his own the perspective of Trotskyism. He interpreted the Lenin. That's why actually he actually that means Guattari tried to renovate the Lenin's concept of party. That means actually that's why he actually invented his own so-called molecular Leninism. That's actually very interesting. I will explain it later. So in those days, lots of the young people, mostly actually student, right? The Angst, student in Angst is economal, and then in those some of those, of course, actually the student, the Althusser student, right? Althusser student, Louis Althusser student, and then Jacques Rancière and Etienne Balibar, some not quite student, but at some point is inspired by the Althusser, is the Alain Badiou. Alain Badiou is not in the Paris in those days, but then he actually was in the small city outside of Paris. But anyway, just these people actually went to the Maoism, but Guattari didn't go Mao. It's a very interesting situation, because Guattari is Trotskyist, and then actually he actually imbibed this kind of Trotskyism and then the Lacanian psychoanalysis, but he found out some problem. Problem what? Problem of the democratic centralism, all right? And he couldn't actually solve this problem within this group. That means even Lacanian psychoanalysis cannot give him the kind of some solution. And then also, the what is the Maoism, didn't actually give him that kind of solution. So that's why he actually hesitate to, decide which direction he must take. But actually, he actually read, that is what he told, um, um, he read, the Deleuze, two books, the different repetition and logical sense. Not many people actually, regarded these books as a kind of political book. But if you read, carefully, different repetition and then logical sense, you would find out, the former is actually the Deleuze engagement into Althuserianism, Althusser. And then the second one is the latter. The logical sense is actually he tried to engage, structuralism. So in both, books, he tried to, deconstruct the structure, and then he also, that means that Deleuze tried to put forward kind of, the deeper understanding of structure. In Deleuzian sense, always the structure related to law, and the sense, and also the actually related to the law. And through actually this idea, Deleuze tried to actually prove the necessity of revolution. That is what exactly actually he tried to do. Is two books. Even in the different repetition, you would know that actually he criticized Hegelianism, right? But he wasn't the first philosopher who criticized Hegelianism in those days. Althusser already did, the poor Marx. He actually did that. But you can find out, the Deleuze, didn't he directly, mention Althusser there? But anyway, he actually quoted, even he rephrased a huge part of poor Marx in the different repetition. When he actually discussed, the problem of Hegelianism, that idea is really actually, borrowed from the Althusser. So I think actually when Deleuze wrote these two books, he really, he was really influenced by Althusser. But he already knew, problem of a so-called structuralist Marxism. So he tried to actually find out the exit of this structuralism or structuralist Marxism, right? And then actually that is exactly what Guattari discovered. And then he finally decided the departing from, the Lacan, and then he went to the Deleuze. In those days, Deleuze was in Lyon. He got, some surgery, and that's why he had some kind of the period, to be recovered. So actually, the Guattari went to the Deleuze, and then they started to work together. That is actually the whole story. So in this sense, actually, Deleuze Guattari really actually, very heretic, the encounter. What I'm in those days, Guattari was really radical, and then ultra left, he actually belonged to this kind of actually radical, the Trotsky group. But this, the active militant, the kind of symbol of militant what met, the Deleuze. He was actually a professor, the kind of some the person who regarded as a kind of philosopher in the institution, all right? Because actually the Alain Badiou attacked, the Deleuze, the kind of some the opium of people, something like that. He actually, because the Deleuze actually involved the kind of some some kind of some university issue, right? Is a kind of some university issue. But actually, in those days, Deleuze was not really actually regarded as the political philosopher, but this apolitical philosopher, found his alliance in this radical group. So that is Guattari's, the quite scandalous, the encounter with Deleuze, and then that actually made Deleuze really actually political.
I think I would agree with what I think you're saying is in a sense that I think you can actually find moments of Deleuze's politics earlier than in meeting with Guattari. You just have to like look a little bit harder and read what's in between the text rather than just the text itself. But it's definitely there. But one of the things I wanted to ask about this is one of your big arguments across the book, is you argue that a sort of a big part of what shapes Deleuze and Guattari's writings and on Deleuze's writing more generally is an engagement with sort of revolutionary movements in the third world, or
Sure.
as I suppose we should say, we would probably call it today the developing world, or sort of they're shaped by their engagement with anti-colonial movements, with the non-aligned movement. Um, and so maybe can you just sort of unpack a bit, sort of like, I mean, I would think to a certain extent in France in the 50s to 70s, all politics and philosophy is being shaped by anti-colonial movements because that is the sort of, what is shaping the world order. But can we unpack a little bit about sort of the particular ways in which um, Deleuze and Guattari are engaging with sort of anti-colonial revolts, and how that sort of shifts their way of thinking and their approach to politics?
A good question is the before actually meeting Guattari, in my opinion, Deleuze was already, anti-colonial,
Mm,
anti-colonial philosopher. I don't think actually any, the person like Deleuze in the, the history of European philosophy, you know, actually most of philosopher in Europe actually Eurocentric, even though, there's some Marxist, because actually they phrase the knowledge. But Deleuze is actually even, quite his early, the career, he was, because he wanted to be a filmmaker, rather than philosopher. But actually, he was really skeptical. That means that Deleuze was really skeptical of such knowledge, European knowledge. He was very skeptical of that. So, because he actually read, many, by heretic philosopher, in those days, that is his apprenticeship. He actually, even, that his early book, you can find out. You can find that, for instance, the logical sense, he already discussed Robinson Crusoe, you know, his point is not just post-colonial. If you actually read, the Deleuze interpretation of Michel Tournier's, Vendredi is like a Friday, the kind of Tournier's, novel is Vendredi is actually what a parody of Robinson Crusoe. But Marx already, analyzed, the Robinson Crusoe in his Capital, and then the Marx, the Marx analysis showed that in Robinson Crusoe is a typical European bourgeois story, right? Althusser also took this idea and then he actually developed the concept Robinson-Nate. The Althusser's point is that all ideology is actually Robinson-Nate, is the bourgeois success story, right? Even today, we actually experience this one. Elon Musk, why Elon Musk really praised? Because he showed that in his own, but the success, and that actually the logic is the same. But that's exactly what the Deleuze thought. That is the reason why he was very skeptical of Eurocentric, perspective, on the world. So and then even the logical sense, he actually criticized, the really actually the dichotomy between the imperialism or some colonialism and post-colonialism or anti-colonialism. He tried to find out the third way. Might be today we could say the kind of actual attempt could be called the decolonizing, the project. But in those days, he didn't use that in decolonizing something, but he mostly actually tried to say the philosophy of third. That's why he tried to build actually the kind of foundation of the third philosophy. Of course, actually Merleau-Ponty and the many, some, the philosopher, as you said, in France in those days, try to, the attack the imperialism and then try to defend, third world movement. But in my opinion, is quite, those attempts really valuable, but actually not quite enough. But Deleuze actually, also try to engage this kind of, the colonizing, the philosophical project. And then that's why quite different from, you know, the other the philosopher like Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault really, he also shared many ideas with Deleuze, but what makes the distinction between Deleuze and Foucault is definitely that Foucault was an anti-philosopher. You know, his position is really anti-philosophy, but Deleuze's position is more like, you know, the such a perspective to regard philosophy as, you know, toolbox. That means a weapon, a conceptual weapon. But of course, the Deleuzean concept of philosophy is not just kind of, you know, the Eurocentric sense of metaphysics, not like Heidegger. That's why Deleuze, you know, really actually, you know, they're hostile to two philosophers. Which one is not actually Hegel, is but, you know, Kant, Immanuel Kant. He was really hostile to Immanuel Kant. In my opinion, the rejection of Kant is in my Deleuze lifelong project. He tried to you know, reject the critical philosophy as such. He tried to actually find out the third way, you know, against the, you know, the Kantian sense of critique, because Kantian sense of critique, as you know, the Foucault really correctly pointed out, the kind of, you know, Kantian sense of critique must what is a presuppose the obedience to knowledge. You must study. You must study first. But that is exactly what Deleuze really, you know, the doubt. He actually really doubts that you know, is it really actually the knowledge, you know, will give us liberation? You know, does knowledge really liberate us? That is actually Deleuze's question, and then also Foucault's question too. But why did actually Deleuze, you know, the retain the possibility of philosophy? Because he actually believed that, you know, in my opinion, that is actually Lenin's idea of a theory. Of course, the Althusser also had similar theory, you know, the capital theory, you know, the general theory. And then Deleuze had, you know, similar idea. Althusser, Louis Althusser.
Well, I mean, couldn't you say in for Deleuze the prime task of philosophy is not critique, but the creation of concepts.
Exactly, it's a creation. That is also the Deleuze and the Guattari's contribution to. There's lots of Marxism, you know, actually, what I mean, Marxist philosopher, in particular, actually, after Second World War, you know, Adorno, you know, for instance, you know, actually he adapted, you know, the Kant, even Per Anderson these days, you know, is really actually the adapted Kantian sense of the critique. And then that's why actually Deleuze and Guattari, you know, went to quite another direction. It's different direction, you know, the creation. Focusing on, that's why they needed, you know, the Bergson, you know, the Bergson, what is provide them with a new idea of, you know, the creation is what I mean, actually, the Bergson said, you know, the creation of future rely on what is a separation of time from space. But, you know, actually the Kantian sense of critique always rest on what is a unification of time and space, is ideal knowledge. But Deleuze Guattari, you know, actually when adopting, you know, the Bergsonian idea, and their project is a political project definitely to you know, the separate time from space. That is what exactly, in my opinion, the core idea when they discussed the partiality and ritournelle, because partiality is belong to the, you know, the spatiality belongs to the kind of territory, is a space. But, you know, the time is really, it doesn't have any boundary, it doesn't have any territory, you know, re-territorialization, deterritorialization, re-territorialization, you know, at the same time. So they actually try to focus on the sound rather than, you know, this kind of some space, you know, that's the reason why. Yeah, anyway, just if I get back to the, you know, your question is third world things, really, in those days, all kind of, you know, some French Marxists, you know, try to bring in, you know, the third world into their own, you know, the political project. But, you know, what does that mean? Actually, Jacques Rancière, you know, told me, you know, that, you know, in May, you know, 68, you know, the 1968 May, there was a first time, you know, the student in France, you know, encounter the working class. You know, actually, the France is really a hierarchical society, you know, really hierarchical society. Even their language is really hierarchical. You know, actually, the very, you know, the stubborn distinction between even, you know, the male form and the female form, something like even gender distinction there. And then is 19, you know, until the 1950 and 1960, the really actually did that, you know, the system is really elite oriented, you know, elite centered. But that's why actually in those days, you know, student in angst means what is a super elite, right? But this elite what encountered working class. That's why actually Jacques Rancière invented a new concept, aesthetic dimension. Is a kind of some different, you know, the you know, the people, you know, actually belonging to the different, you know, group, actually the mixed up. That is a chaos, you know, that emerged. That is exactly demos. But actually, that's why they went to the, you know, this student, super elite, the studied, you know, some leftist theory, and then they finally what? Found, they finally found those, you know, agency, you know, that means that those people, they must contribute. And then they decided to go to the factory. And then what they discovered, this is the Jacques Rancière's interesting, the Jacques Rancière's, you know, episode. They went to the factory, they found out what? Almost all working class in factory were immigrant workers. This is a reality. It's not just, you know, the abstract idea in those days, 1968. It's not, it does not mean, you know, some kind of a theoretical, you know, break or some, it's not just, you know, the kind of some, the ethical, you know, the term. It's a really ontological, you know, the discovery, the transformation, ontological dimension there. So that changed, you know, the French society, you know, since then. That's what they say.
Well, I think with this shift from, let's say, critique to creation, you
Sure.
could also make interesting links to autonomous Marxism and ideas of class composition. So here, I mean, for instance, rather than here are the position of the workers, let's represent them, or here is the party. It's almost what you get as a question of, okay, what politics can be invented for students? What politics can be invented for housewives, for migrants? How can they find ways to struggle and refuse? And then inventing a new form of revolt based around many positions rather than representing what's already there.
Yeah, that is a good question too. Is actually in my opinion, you know, the Guattari really influenced Deleuze. Of course, Deleuze has a theory. Deleuze has theory, but Guattari has an experience of practice.
Mm.
And then they met and they actually produced, in my opinion, very unique the concept of politics, so-called, you know, micro politics, or some, in other words, we can say that, you know, I already mentioned is a molecular, you know, the Leninism, or molecular, you know, the organization. What I mean, actually, what does that mean? Actually, this is actually the reason why they didn't follow the Maoism. Actually, the idea is really rooted in the very old debate between Rosa Luxemburg and Lenin. You know, the debate over the issue of what is a spontaneity. And then Lenin's conclusion was that, you know, the economic, he actually rejected, you know, the very, you know, the kind of some vulgar sense of the development is a kind of for instance, you know, the quantitative development didn't actually, you know, get the kind of qualitative difference. That's what Lenin discovered. I mean, that's why he criticized spontaneity, the concept of spontaneity, and then Rosa Luxemburg's defense of spontaneity. Spontaneity does not mean, you know, immediately that revolutionary the eruption. So there needs, you know, the spontaneity, the spontaneous eruption needs a theoretical organization. That's what actually Lenin said. That is Lenin's concept of party. But of course, actually, this party what ended up with some sort of bureaucratic, you know, centralism, even though they called it itself as a democratic centralism. Anyway, that is a bureaucratic, you know, actually that kind of fact is revealed through this Algerian war. This is what happened. The situation changed. But that's why actually many, you know, the Marxists converted to anarchism. like what is it, Baudrillard, and then some Lyotard, some even many, former Marxists that converted to the anarchism. But, Deleuze Guattari didn't, go to the anarchism. Of course, they adopted, many ideas from anarchism, but they didn't take that kind of, actually, the revolution or some communism without party. That means actually the Maoism, of course, actually they actually put that the importance on the mass, rather than party, right? The party is just a kind of some manipulator, to insert that kind of contradiction into the mass. But the Deleuze-Guattari's idea is really quite, in my opinion, opposed to this sort of a mechanical, or some kind of a very, some how can I say, really, really actually, simple model of that kind of dialectic. Of course, actually, some Maoists would say that actually Mao is the version of contradiction more complicated. Okay, but complicated, but it must always the cause some kind of the continuous movement. That means by by something outside, But Deleuze and Guattari said, that kind of some outside is what exists already from within. That means actually that is actually their sense of, the actual micropolitics is immanent. So in this sense, as you said, is according to Deleuze Guattari, this mass already organized themselves. Do you know what I mean? Is that they already got organization. They don't actually have, party. They don't have party, but they actually have their own, whatever called. Some anarchists would say, some community, okay, or some commune, whatever called, is already actually, even though we don't need, even though actually we have no actually party, but they already had this kind of organization. You would see that even soccer club, football club, your neighborhood, they have their own the rule of the organization, and then that's actually the reason why they said central party impossible, or some central party is the powerless, because actually the group already got their own organization in immanent way. And then that's why actually the Guattari proposed some molecular Leninism. It doesn't mean actually that the cancellation of party as such, but the kind of some party which must create some kind of transversality. That means actually it doesn't mean like what Maoists argue, the party must insert some kind of contradiction into the mass. It doesn't mean that. Must be is a part of this, the group. That is a group agency. That is what actually Guattari said, is we must be part of this group. That's very important. A lot of actually the militant thought. We must teach, we must lead, this mass. Even, Maoists, they cannot, they give up this idea. That's what actually that is what exactly actually the Deleuze and Guattari argue, is when they discussed, the rhizome. The rhizome doesn't, the chaos does not mean nothing there. It's already something, something activates. And then problem is, how can we actually rearrange this activity? Only way we can do that is we must be part of this group. That is becoming. You must be becoming workers, becoming women, becoming immigrants, workers, and becoming, the Black, becoming whatever. This is actually what they said. The becoming is transversality, and then this is really important. The revolution means actually, creating this transversality. That's why actually what I said. This is quite a, in my opinion, very crucial shift from that kind of some critical theory to their own immanent politics.
Well, it's interesting because the notion of transversality comes out of very actually sort of everyday tasks in the board where they're working on the rotation of of who's doing what and distributing tasks. So you don't get sedimented hierarchies in terms of leadership. So it comes
Sure.
from a very sort of concrete thing, which then they expand philosophically.
It's like actually network theory, but it's not just the agency. It's not even network theory presuppose the kind of agency or something like that. It's social, actually like a sociological concept. But the Deleuze-Guattari concept is more like, more like a quite different from the kind of concept, sociological concept of agency, because actually they said, actually the important thing is definitely what? Intensity, intensity is a desire. That's why they emphasize desire. Desire is a kind of somewhat is the power to preserve yourself, right? So that means every life would have, it's like a Spinoza's sense, a desire to preserve yourself. But transversалity is what? You must, redirect this, desire toward the outside. That means actually toward not yourself, but, the other people. And that is becoming, and then it doesn't mean actually you should actually, be kind of some, the kind of some, militant to manage all kind of some, the people, control these people. It doesn't mean that. You must be part of this one. And then if you create this transversality like, the guerrilla, I think the Zapatista and the Mexico actually really actually, would be a really good example. Even, they still, they still work, but not many people actually mention them. But and it's a kind of example. We have many examples like this.
An interesting point of residence, which I don't think you pick up, but have you ever come across Huey P. Newton's like from later's writings on the idea of intercommunalism? Because
Sorry?
Huey P. Newton for the Black Panther Party,
Yeah,
his
yeah.
idea of
Yeah,
intercommunalism. So he starts. This is, I guess, so there's a certain point where the Black Panthers have sort of started to move away from being black nationalists. And he starts saying, actually, we're getting to a point where nations aren't as important. What the power resides not in governments, but in interconnected networks of people who control money and technology, which he calls reactionary intercommunalism, or what Guattari will call later integrated world capitalism, right?
yeah.
The idea is that power resides through control of technology and networks. And he says, therefore, what we need to do is focus less on governments, but creating networked federations of communities who can build together, which he calls which he calls revolutionary intercommunalism, which to me sounds a lot like the way that Deleuze and Guattari talk about how the people are missing. We must constantly invent new people, um,
Mhm.
rather than falling back into existing representations.
Exactly. Actually, that, the theory, actually, when you describe, in terms of government and control, is definitely given by English utilitarian, Thomas Hobbes.
Ah,
Thomas Hobbes had invented the so-called the political philosophy, right? Nowadays, actually, this political philosophy turned into political science in America. And then that's a political philosophy aims at, the creating the kind of mechanical actually the system to create the people. But actually, of course, the Thomas Hobbes, said, what the kind of some the abstract idea of a social contract, right? It's through this kind of idea of a social contract, the multitude, is a mob, the kind of beast, turn into people. That's actually the typical theory of, governance or some government as such. But I think actually Deleuze-Guattari also shared many ideas with the Thomas Hobbes, but of course against Thomas Hobbes, because they criticize liberalism and criticize, the theory of social contract. And we don't, they don't need, they said, the people don't need this kind of some social contract. Even Karl Marx, criticized, the theory of social contract. But and then you need to actually know this one is, in my opinion, the one of actually the big contribution of Deleuze-Guattari to the this kind of Marxist understanding of history and then the state is definitely his own. No, sorry. Their big contribution to Marxism is that actually they try to reinterpret meaning of state. So even the Engels said the state is actually developed in evolutionary way. Is a evolutionary development of what the production force, right? And then certain the level of the kind of the development of production. What happened is state came to exist. That is what the Engels explain by influenced by the that kind of what is that? It's Morgan is the American evolutionary anthropologist. And then against this one, actually, the Deleuze-Guattari proposed quite interesting theory of state. A state is declared. That's why they took some example of what is Oriental despotism. Actually, the assertive mode of production. Why assertive mode of production? Is this actually the paradox of a Marxist, the understanding of history? That Hegel, thought, Asia is really actually, the behind fashion in political sense. Of course, economically in those days, China was really the richest country, one of the richest country in the world. But anyway, just politically, according to Hegel, is really the behind fashion. But why did actually the underdeveloped country had powerful sovereignty, powerful despotism? That is actually what I mean. Actually, the Deleuze-Guattari pointed out. In this sense, actually, the state, nothing to do with this kind of the development of the production force, or nothing to do with this kind of evolution of the history. The state as such declare, and then declare to what? Declared to capture the war machine. This is exactly what they said. So the war machine is not just the kind of some bulk of individual, but kind of war machine is the functional assemblage. Is a kind of some connection. So in this sense, what does that mean? Actually, creating a new people. New people is exactly what political subject. And then if you rearrange this kind of some war machine, this connection or some in the original sense, the synthesis, different synthesis, and then or some assemblage or agencement is a rearrangement of this, the power. What happened? This structure, the new structure, right? Movable structure, and then continuously, the changing structure, what would produce new people. So this is actually very important theoretical model, in my opinion. Deleuze-Guattari didn't say, subject would, some produce revolution, something like that. They didn't say that. This kind of revolution situation would produce or create the people. That's what Guattari's point to. That means actually the subject was produced by this structure, not subject that produced the structure. So when this that's why transversality, this assemblage, and this micropolitic important. Actually you must create a new sense. That's what actually Deleuze said. Everybody knows all kind of revolution fails. Everybody knows all kind of revolution fails. Revolution necessarily failed. But why people keep talking about failure of a revolution? Why people keep talking about failure of a communism? Everybody knows communism is impossible. That is actually Deleuze said, because we don't want communism. So what is the revolutionary philosophy according to Deleuze? You must what? You must redirect the philosophy, or some redirect the philosophy to actually change the people toward they kind of wanting future, different future, alternative future. That is exactly what they actually criticize the fascism too. Is the fascism and the communism, share the many, the ideas. What is difference between fascism and communism? According to Deleuze, is fascism is always promise us we can, get back to the past, because actually what we have at the moment is exactly continuation of past, right? There's like a Trump, the concept. Of course, Trump is not a fascist, but anyway, he took advantage of this fascist passion, right? So fascists already promised us we can restore the kind of glorious past. But on the contrary, according to Deleuze, and the communism, of course, a revolution was creation of a new people is always related to what? Is a line of flight. That means creating a future. That is what, communist, the communism promised us. We would what? Create new future. And then that is exactly the moment we can, start from scratch again. I think actually already in capitalism keep actually exploiting the communist movement. That is what, according to Deleuze and Guattari, the primitive is an actual reiteration of primitive accumulation. When capitalism came in a certain place, and they actually deterritorialized, that place, and then they exploited, the kind of some the resources. That is actually what I said is reiteration of a primitive accumulation. Today, think about the AI. A lot of people phrase the AI is artificial intelligence, new technology. No, this is not really new technology. It's just a new paradigm of capitalist accumulation. So actually, that is already actually Deleuze, the Guattari pointed out in the Thousand Plato, and then the repetition, reiteration of or recurrence of what? Recurrence of this kind of primitive, accumulation. That is, in my opinion, Deleuze Guattari's contribution, really big contribution to the Marxism.
Cool. I have things to say, but I'm going to attempt to decenter myself slightly. And I see, actually, do you know Harry? Maybe you know Harry, but Harry wants to ask us something. Harry Halpin. Hey, Eric, what's up?
Harry? Okay.
I think
So
I'm muted.
microphone. Yeah. Okay.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was an excellent talk, and I haven't read the book, but I look forward to it. So I was wondering, I mean, a lot of people have, critiqued Deleuze for being apolitical, and you've seen obviously Deleuze being misused. And Deleuze also argued that a bad argument from personal experience is always a bad argument. And I think that's true. But I was always suspicious of those claims. I lived in France for a while, and I knew his wife, Fanny. Fanny was very left-wing, did prison solidarity for the Tarnac Nine, among many other people. His daughter was has been publicly supportive of Palestine. Does your book go into, particularly given this historical moment, Deleuze's actual activity with Palestinian scholars? I think he founded the French Journal of Palestinian Solidarity. I mean, I would like to know. I mean, he must have had some relations, but it's, to my knowledge, not particularly well documented.
Yeah,
Which makes the usage of Deleuze by the Israeli military even more perverse. But yes.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I discussed that one in my book. Actually, the chapter titled "The Grandeur, the Greatness of Marx" is the Deleuze Unwritten Marx. He wrote a very interesting article on the Arafat. Arafat is a grandeur. Arafat is Yasser Arafat is. I think actually, the Foucault and Deleuze, departed because of that issue. The Deleuze supported Palestine, while the Foucault didn't. And even Foucault really the ambiguous attitude toward Foucault had a really ambiguous attitude toward Israel. So like today's Hamas, something like that. So that is actually crucial the reason they actually departed, even though later Foucault really changed, after his visit to Iran, and he changed. But anyway, just all philosophy is very complicated, right? You couldn't, judge any philosophy by just one single discussion. But anyway, just that's why I love, Deleuze. And then Deleuze really always took the risky position, you know, very heretic position. He always took the, like, for instance, when, you know, the Soviet bloc is collapsed, he officially, you know, and openly declare he has been Marxist, just like that. We already took such a kind of position. I think even Palestine issue, in those days, not many people actually, you know, clearly actually showed their support to Palestine, you know. But Deleuze actually really defended, you know, the Palestine. That's why he wrote, you know, article, Grandeur of Yasser Arafat. What is the actual meaning of this grandeur? You know, his position is really what is derived from the perspective of a third world. A lot of people actually, you know, try to judge something, you know, actually around the so-called in the rest of the world from the perspective really actually Eurocentric idea, even though actually, you know, some anti-European philosopher couldn't, you know, clearly, you know, the free from this kind of some suspicion. But Deleuze actually tried to actually take that kind of risky position, you know. Of course, not like unlike, you know, the Sartre, but he didn't really actually, you know, very and take like a controversial position. But he tried to do by, you know, developing, you know, his own philosophical thought. That's why if you carefully read, you know, his book, you can find lots of code, you know, or some kind of engagement, or secret engagement into it. So that's why I think very, if you, I recommend you actually to Deleuze, you know, the interview, and then the little bit, you know, the small article, not really proper books. Really proper books are really, you know, the very profound. So more actually, you know, codes and more secret, you know, the hidden in the, you know, text. For instance, the cinema, you know, for instance, cinema, you know, some friends in France actually really complain, you know, actually my friend is even, you know, Slavoj Žižek, he told me that, you know, the Deleuze cinema is a really great book, but it totally ruined, you know, film study. But cinema book is nothing to do with film study, all right? Nothing to do with film study. Cinema book is definitely a philosophy of third world. And then, you know, another one is actually, you know, to actually the simplified actually Deleuze-Guattari's the argument of micropolitics or some politics of the immanence. Definitely, actually, Deleuze-Guattari phrased, you know, madness, right? Madness. It doesn't mean actually, you know, they actually phrased, you know, the madness in the pathological way. It's not quite a romantic sense. They actually, you know, try to define, you know, the mode of existence, actually general mode of existence. That means human subjectivity as such, as what? Certain, you know, the invention of reality against schizophrenic, you know, state of ontology. That means a human being as such is a schizophrenia, you know. It's not the pathological one. Actually, that's why they attacked. It's like the Adi Rang's, you know, position, very similar to Adi Rang's position, but Adi Rang is really the romantic, at some point, is quite humanistic. But Deleuze-Guattari, you know, had a different idea. That's why against the Freud, you know, that they said the psychosis is actually, you know, the homeostasis of our ontological state. You know, this is really, really a radical position. So the subject is nothing else than what is our own fantasy. But you know, actually, you will be very familiar with this concept. Why? This is Lacanian, later Lacanian concept. You know, is a kind of fantasy. You know, the formula is without, you know, this fantasy, actually we cannot, you know, unite our desire. So from this perspective, is always what whole world is now moving. Whole world is in the verge of a revolution. So all system, all, you know, the kind of some regime, any technology, what the aim is at, you know, the suppressing this revolutionary desire, or revolutionary, you know, the dismantling. That's actually what the Deleuze and Guattari said. So our life as such is what? Revolutionary. You know, and then this actual state and this system, but of course, actually, they don't actually really underestimate, you know, power of a state. Of course, the state is a capturing machine. So they said, you know, how can we, you know, rearrange this capturing machine for future? Not, you know, actually, you know, the enhancing that one, like, you know, the Stalinism or some, you know, today's China, you know, just to try to what is enhancing, you know, the enforcing the kind of some central power, you know, the imposed on the, you know, the kind of some, you know, the production, you know, the power, something like production force is a working class, something like that. So they really actually, you know, try to find out some, you know, the third way, you know, between these two actually extremes. But of course, actually, what I mean, actually, they gave us a really clear, you know, the solution. They didn't intend to give us any solution, but they already gave us many, you know, the insightful philosophical discussion over these issues.
So Camilla unfortunately had to leave, but I'm going to attempt to sort of like ask what she was asking before she had to leave, if that's okay.
Mhm.
And one of the things that she's asking about here is about the difference between transversality versus the articulation of a network. Um, and so the idea is if you're creating or inventing a people, how you're also sort of preserving a sense of outsideness within that which you create, and of how you're if what you're trying to do is trying to avoid homogenization rather than trying to make everything into unified whole, how do you work to sort of constantly invent and not homogenize and to sort of foster places for difference and dissent rather than homogenization? Because it's very easy to say we are open to dissent and discussion. You know, anyone who's worked at a university knows the dean will say that, but they don't actually mean that, right? You know what I mean? So
Exactly, exactly.
how
Yeah.
you go about actually in the process of invention of articulate, of not creating homogenization, and how that connects to the difference between transversality, just networks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. It's a good question too. Is because that's why Deleuze really actually, you know, criticize communication when Antonio Negri, you know, had interview with Deleuze. Antonio Negri, you know, the question, how, you know, the communism possible? And Deleuze said, you know, I don't know actually exactly, but the Deleuze answer it wouldn't come, you know, through a communication. That means he actually does not trust, you know, debate. Debate, open-minded debate. That's why I think actually Deleuze-Guattari's philosophy of the immanent polity is really ontological. I already explained, you know, the Camilla's, you know, the question is, in my opinion, the life as such is differentiating, you know. But you know, we actually voluntarily, that is actually the Deleuze actually Guattari, you know, made the two categories by which, you know, this the apparatus of capture is a state, you know, actually imposed the kind of power on us, our life. The first one is ideological oppression. Ideological, that is a Althusser, you know, discussed. But they emphasized more than, you know, this ideological oppression. What is the voluntary, the machinic enslavement, which is based on the voluntary obedience or some voluntary, you know, servitude. That means we actually willing to actually indulge our desire to machine. And that's the social media. We try to actually escape from this kind of iron cage, but at the same time, we is willing to, you know, sacrifice your freedom. You know, we hate freedom. As Slavoj Žižek said, we hate the freedom, you know, to choose. That's what I mean. Actually, for instance, Netflix. If you open the Netflix, you cannot actually choose anything. But, you know, algorithm of Netflix will recommend you. That is exactly what we need, or what we want. that Deleuze-Guattari said we should change this our wanting, and we should actually what? Change ourselves to enjoy this freedom. That's why let you actually let you actually free into the kind of multiplicity. So stop thinking and then jump into this multiplicity. That is what they said. So of course actually the typical 1960 the spirit there. But anyway, I think we, in my opinion, we must still take on this lesson, and then actually as opposed their discussion of the technology, we actually experience really the typical the situation they already anticipated, right? So artificial intelligence, for instance, the big data, and then this big data is Deleuze, the already actually what is pointed out. He was not actually the quite a romantic philosopher on the technology. He didn't say that we should reject the technology or something. He didn't say like that. When he tried to say that this actually certain technology, of course, techno science, which actually established after the Second World War, and then taken by the America, and then the settled down as a kind of some typical R&D model. Today's China actually took this model too, and then they also put a lot of money. And then the Soviet Union did, before when they developed the Sputnik, something like that. This model is a techno science model. It's a really clearly understood this one. And then he's not anti-technology person, but he tried to say we should change, use of technology. And then according to his definition, today technology really connected to what? Financial capitalism. It's correct. He did not deploy automatization. He did not actually this kind of some dehumanization. He didn't say like that. He said today's technology, today's control technology, what? Connected to financial capitalism. That means technology used for what? Making profit. Very clear. His idea very clear. So in this sense, actually, we need to actually adopt Deleuze-Guattari's sense of the art against technology. That means actually control technology. They actually try to emphasize, the politics of art. Art as such, artistic practice. This is exactly the experimental, the experimental practice of technology, and then this experimental the practice of technology is what way in which we create heterogeneous politics. That means, for instance, if we have a refrigerator, okay, just fridge, in your home, when actually this fridge, out of order is broken, what do you do? What would you do? Actually fix it, try to fix it, or throw it away, and you're gonna buy another one. This is what actually consumer society taught. But the Deleuze-Guattari would say, if actually fridge, the broken, you can use the fridge in a different way. All right, indigenous people, and my grandmother already did, when my grandmother then used, the broken, the refrigerator for the table. Something like that. Actually, that is what Deleuze-Guattari said in terms of politics, the art of the political art. That is an experiment. This idea is because your idea always open to practice, and this is what David Hume said. That's what actually David Hume said. Only two categories can produce the knowledge. It means one is impression, and one is idea. Well, when idea met, when idea meets this impression, that means when idea is practiced, and through experience, and then knowledge was produced. But that means knowledge is unstable. Knowledge could be changed. As knowledge is not a norm, it must be practiced. I think from this perspective, Deleuze and Guattari, they emphasized experimental aspect of the technology, and then even we can actually use the technology in any sense, and then that is the reason why that we need to actually think about technology in a very serious way. It's not just a tool; it's a kind of purpose. So we must create a purpose. That is what actually Deleuze got to emphasize. We need to create different purpose. How? That is our question. I think that is leftist question. You know, we lost our purpose.
But it's one of those things that you're gonna work that out not through coming up with theorizing it ahead of time, but by messing around and finding out and breaking some things and then seeing what happens.
Mhm.
And one thing that I really like is an idea, and this is maybe a not so serious way to think about it, is I really like that when Tony Negri has to flee Italy, he lives for a while, because he has no paperwork, he has to claim that he's Guattari's brother.
Yeah.
So he lives under the name Tony Guattari.
I think as a Guattari is very underestimated in my opinion. But he inspired in Zapatista and many, the political group in Latin America. Many people said, communism ended and then communism failed. But, the only human being can learn something from that failure, not the machine. Machine cannot, learn. But we can learn, from that failure. So that's why, okay, as Deleuze said, everybody knows, everyone knows, any revolutionary fails. But that's why we can learn something. That's why actually, Deleuze emphasized, the role of a philosophy. Without philosophy, you cannot learn. That's very important. And then that idea also resonated with Lenin too. In this sense, actually, you should read, Deleuze, from the perspective of Lenin. You would find lots of insight.
Well, it reminds me of that there's this really lovely line from A Thousand Plateaus where they say that each failure is a masterpiece, another branch of the rhizome.
Exactly.
And so the point is just to keep branching and finding and experimenting. But maybe maybe we can use it as a sort of way to nudge towards, not finishing, but so getting towards our sort of pausing point for today, and just thinking through if failures are masterpieces, what's your next failure, Alex?
Fail better. We should fail again. Okay, that is Deleuze-Guattari's message. That's why we should study philosophy and we should study, history and the literature too. And then we keep going this one. This is our life. And then I think actually that this is a very important idea. We should live, not die. And then this living is always related to the planetary, idea. And that's why they also very emphasize the cosmic, the imagination of a planet, not just the global. Global is really actually geographical sense. It's a very imperialist idea. But planetary is quite different because indigenous people, I hate this term, indigenous people, just the people living everywhere, not only European, not only American, but also non-European, non-American living on this earth, Earth, even more than human, plant, the animals, lots of things, even, micro, bio, the something is living on this earth. We have some purpose to protect this life. That must be actually the 21st, the communist project, in my opinion. There's an invention of a new people who actually take care of this planet.
Excellent. Well, that's a very fitting way to come to a pause. But thank you very much for coming along, Alex.
For having me. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you both. Really nice talk. Much appreciated.
Jim, thank you.